I would like to welcome you all, and because this workshop, seeing the big picture is essential in creating a sustainable home or building science, energy efficiency, material sourcing, whether new or renovation. It needs to be well designed, cozy, and affordable. So we're thrilled to have Gwendolyn Saint-Sauveur, EI and Certified Lead Green Associate, to speak today. She is owner and founder of BTF Residential Designs, an architectural and mechanical HVAC design firm specializing in space, energy, and resource efficient homes. And they're based at the Northern Vermont, which explains Gwen's passion for both everything green building and skiing. With hundreds of commercial and residential projects for local engineering firms and contractors across New England, she's worn the various hats of mechanical engineer, MEP designer, architectural designer, construction coordinator, solar engineer, and estimator. Established in 2015, BTF has started a new trend by offering pre-designed stock net zero. Oops, I'm sorry. I'm glad admitting some more people from our waiting room. So BTF is this new trend offering pre-designed stock net zero and fossil-free home plans and construction that's going on in 35 different states. Before she begins, we'd like to take a moment to thank both of our sponsors, the Northshire Bookstore and VS ECU, for their years of support for SolarFest and for making this presentation possible. The Northshire Bookstore is a family-owned independent bookstore with locations in Manchester Center, Vermont, and Saratoga Springs, New York. Beyond the finest and largest collection of new and used rare books and unique gifts to enrich and engage the mind, they recognize that business occurs in the context of the greater collective and work hard to enrich our community. See them at northshire.com. VSECU is a values-based financial cooperative open to everyone who lives or works in Vermont, whose vision is to inspire a movement that brings people together to empower the possibilities for greater financial, environmental, and social prosperity. They're at vsecu.com. So let's begin. And just a reminder, please enter any questions or comments into the chat using the button at the bottom of the screen. At the end of the presentation, Gwen will have some time to address some of your questions. Thank you, Gwen.
Thank you, Mike. I really appreciate it. Let's see, I'll share my screen. Alrighty. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for tuning in on this, as Mike said, beautiful Saturday. Today we'll do this nice digital net zero workshop. We'll cover the basics and still go into some detail on a few various points that I find near and dear. And as Mike said, we'll try to leave some room for questions at the end. I'll also have my contact information at the end for any questions we don't get a chance to answer. And to curb any super high expectations, I have to admit, I found out about SolarFest 2 weeks ago now, and I, like all of you, were really excited to sit in on a net zero workshop, where I soon found out that the original presenter, an architect, one of the local architects, had to cancel, where Mike reached out and asked if I would present. So the last week I've put this together, and I think it's pretty comprehensive, but I hope you enjoy. So a brief introduction. Mike already jumped into that for me, which was great. And just to elaborate, I guess, we started BTF with the idea of merging architectural and mechanical design for contractors' ease. Our custom work soon became a focus on energy efficiency, and we started seeing gaps specifically in my past career before Bite the Frost, which is what BTF stands for. Before BTF, I saw gaps in the stock plan market where plans were too complicated and they weren't coordinated well. stock plans were typically not very contractor friendly, and they could be far more energy efficient and far more environmentally friendly, which is where we grew to develop the stock net zero. Energy efficiency is a talking point and high thought on all of our minds right now. And what it really inspires us to be better and do better. So in a brief recap, all of the electricity on the grid comes from various sources such as nuclear power, fossil fuel burning, coal, petroleum, gas, and renewables. And so part of the Paris Agreement and the 2050 target to decarbonize the electricity on our grid, it means that making buildings run more on electricity and electric sources rather than burning CO2 is ideal. And so just a couple more numbers, 337 million metric tons of CO2 emissions are produced in the US each year by residential homes alone. So it's certainly a number that we can curb. And just a terrible reminder that the US is second highest producer of CO2 emissions in the world. We fall only behind China. So everything counts. And on a better note, 20% of our grid as of 2020 was from renewable sources, such as solar, wind, or hydro. And that's already up 3% from what it was in 2019. And click, click, there we go. So the idea behind net zero is to reduce our electricity needs one home at a time. And there's a DOE, Department of Energy, Net Zero Energy Ready Home program. And that program is starting to be followed by cities, states, and jurisdictions all around the country. And a number of them are starting to put in place requirements to meet this net zero code. Some places you have to have every new home meet the DOE Net Zero Energy Ready Home plan as soon as 2030. So it's going to be something that we're going to start seeing more and more of. And soon every new home is going to have to meet net zero, depending on where you live. And so what is a net zero home? It's deceiving, and it reminds us that no program is perfect. A net zero home, by the DOE's definition, it is just a building that produces more electricity than it uses each year. So unfortunately, you could even have a home burning with a boiler in the basement, CO2, but as long as you have enough solar panels on your roof to offset your power bill, it will be considered by this program net zero. And that's something that we don't really believe in at BTF. We designed to not only make them net zero, but net zero carbon as well. So all of our homes, they produce electricity, usually with solar panels, and then they're going to also use electricity to heat and cool the homes as well. And electricity can be in the forms of various different systems, but we typically go with heat pumps. And so a truly balanced, well-sized, efficient, fossil fuel-free net zero home is achieved typically by merging architectural and mechanical design from the very beginning. And the industry calls this integrated design. And whoop, I hope you didn't see me click that button. Okay, there we go. Integrated design. And that is what we're going to be talking about today, is the net zero process with integrated design of merging architectural and mechanical HVAC designs throughout the entire process. And so breaking that up, our personal integrated net zero design hits on three major concepts, and that's energy efficiency, space efficiency, and resource efficiency. And by matching and meeting different bits within each of these three departments, you kind of hit this sweet spot of a really nice net zero, fossil fuel free home. And so we'll jump in on the first of the three, which is energy efficiency. And so shape and size, openings, orientation, envelope, and the energy modeling are the five big parts of design that we see within our process. And so we're going to elaborate on each of these in the following slides. And I just want to point out, I don't know if you can see my mouse or not. But between shape and size, openings, orientation, and envelope, the lines are all kind of orangish tan color. And those are all typically things that happen within the architectural design process. And that architectural design process typically has been done by an architecture firm. And then this green bar, where it gets into energy modeling, and then it's followed by HVAC design, that typically would happen by a mechanical firm. BTF, we're an all-in-one shop. And it's really important, I think, going forward for all different firms of all different sorts and to collaborate earlier on in the process. So we're going to jump into shape and size. So designing a home that's very efficient, starting with the shape and size is a perfect spot. And so I had a professor in college that once, asked the whole group, and he was like, "Hey, how do you make something efficient, or how do you stay warm when it's cold out?" And we all were like, we kind of huddle and, shrink into like little balls or whatnot. And he says, you reduce your surface area. And that is absolutely true when it comes to buildings as well. As little surface area that you have exposed to the outside, the better off you are. And so just by geometry, the best shapes to do that, besides having like a circular building, that wouldn't really, well, unless it's a yurt, be very easy to accomplish. So the second best is going to have a square or a rectangular home, that's somewhat even on each side, but also a second floor is very essential. A long, sprawling, one level plan, you just have that much more surface area by means of the roof and that much more exterior walls. So it turns out a long ranch is not in a very efficient shape. So when we were doing our energy modeling and analysis, it was kind of interesting. We found that historical classics like capes and colonials, and even some farmhouses, are remarkably efficient shapes. Obviously, they were built much larger back in the day, but a smaller version is extremely efficient. And we thought that kind of made sense because, back in the day, you'd be chopping down wood by hand. And it seemed, wouldn't they want to chop down less wood both for heating and for building? So maybe they were ahead of the game. So a lot of our designs ended up looking like capes and colonials and historical classics. So then the next design concept, besides having a great shape, is going to be where you put your openings. And openings are in the forms of like windows and doors. And it's different for northern climates and southern climates. And I have a feeling most of us, myself included, are in the northern climates. And so in northern climates, you want to have windows that are on the south, well, east and west as well, but east, west, and south side of your building. And you want to have windows that are taking up a good amount of space on your wall. So like a high, tall, how do I describe it? A narrow and tall window, so that during the course of the year, when the sun path changes and the winter, your sun is very low, you're going to get light into your space. But also in the summer, when the sun is high, you'll still get some direct sunlight, but not too much. And in a southern climate, you kind of want the opposite. You would want a wall on the north side of your building that's got a window that's long and narrow up high that just really doesn't get much direct sunlight at all, because in a more southern climate, all you're dealing with is cooling needs. Whereas up here, we have heating needs where sun is helpful, but we also have a little bit of heating or a little bit of cooling needs, so we don't want to overdo it. So back in like the 70s and 80s, when energy efficient home designs were really starting to kind of become more common, and people were experimenting with all different shapes and sizes and materials, and taking things from Europe and bringing them over here, a large portion of them said, oh, we'll do solar gains on the south side and we'll just do the whole thing in windows. And it ended up being that these rooms overheated and it was too many windows for these spaces. So in all of our energy modeling, it turns out that about a 30% on your south side of windows, 30% of your wall being windows, is kind of an ideal sweet spot for getting enough solar gain in the winter, but not too much in the summer. So once you've organized your shape of your building and where your windows are, and the next important thing is to go for your envelope. And so this is something that's kind of been a hot topic, I think, in recent years, especially with the growth of the passive house programs, and just all of the neat new innovative materials for insulation, and even like high R value windows. Is too much, like, or not enough, or where is the sweet spot of an R value? And for us, one of our our challenges that we kind of presented ourselves in the beginning with is how can we make a net zero, carbon free, really well designed plan based on normal, typical building materials that people have been using for the last 20 years. And so we personally were able to design around a 2x6 wall with 2.5 inch zip sheathing, and that that seemed to be kind of a sweet spot. And so that gave us above grade walls, and we also used roofs. We did like a normal building assembly for our roof values, and we were able with somewhat accessible materials to get an R49 roof. And so all of our models are based around an R34 to an R38 wall with an R49 roof. And then what we were finding is that leaving a basement unfinished, just having that 8 inches, which is, I guess, not always 8 inches, but a standard 8 inch concrete wall with insulation on the outside really wasn't quite enough to keep your home this nice, like, enclosed package. So we, for all of our net zero designs, specified finishing the basement walls with a 2x4 and then some insulation on the inside, as well as the exterior sheathing, which is required by a number of building authorities. So that ended up with an R35 basement wall. And then continuous base insulation underneath the basement slabs is also really important. It made quite a big difference in our energy calculations, which we're going to dive into in a little bit. And we also used some pretty standard windows. We just used a line of Marvins that were, accessible. There's a lot of net zero homes that use windows which come from Europe, and are, long lead times, and, shipping all the way across the world might not be as environmentally friendly as you want to be, with your material choices. So we designed, we figured out you can do it with what you would consider a normal assembly. So then once you've figured out your envelope of your building, your orientation is a next really key point. So you've kind of picked where you want your windows to be as south and east and north facing. So usually a building site would be in mind. It is possible to pre-design it and specify, hey, when you put this on a job site, this needs to be north. And that's what we did for our stock plans. But another thing to consider besides the windows, which direction is north, is when you have a pitched roof that you're going to put PV solar arrays on, you want that to be directly facing south, for as much energy as you can get. Also, 12-12 pitch is a 45-degree roof, and that's also ideal for getting as much solar gain as you can for your PV system. So then you've got your orientation, your envelope, your shape, your openings. Now you're at the point of energy modeling. And energy modeling, as I mentioned before, is something that usually a mechanical firm is going to do, but it's very important, and it's something that really hasn't been done in the past. So typically a contractor would do, just kind of like a rule of thumb, BTU per square foot, like, oh, okay, this building is 1,800 square feet and we'll do this many BTUs per square foot. And similarly, they do the same for cooling. So the cooling BTU or tons per square foot of past was 1 ton of cooling is 400 square feet of floor. And those really aren't worth doing anymore. It's not accurate. And specifically in the last 10 years, any contractors who are still doing this method may have run across oversized HVAC equipment. So their boiler might be short cycling, running too much, not meeting the efficiency that the tag said it could when they bought it brand new. And these are all just things you want to avoid. Your systems are going to wear out faster. You're going to have to replace your equipment, and it's just not ideal. So it is really going to be, I think, a building point in the future with new construction to do energy models. And you could do like a different BTU per square foot of the future, but we found it can vary so much in these tight buildings. So for instance, over here for our homes, so our homes have a very small square footage range. We don't do anything over, I think it's like 1850 square feet. That is the most that we do, and the smallest is around 700 or 800 square feet. And so when we were doing our calculations, we found that we had a 1,200 square foot home that only needed 8 BTU per square foot on the coldest day. And then we have one that's only a couple extra 100 square feet, and it needed 13 BTU per square feet. And then our smaller plans, we had a 750 square foot plan, and it needed 16 BTUs per square foot. So that's really quite a big range. I mean, it doubles from plan to plan, and we're using the exact same materials, the exact same windows, the exact same insulation and R values. So I think that this is a great example of how detailed modeling during the design allows for the architect and the engineer to collaborate and make modifications. So like perhaps you move a window to the other side of a room, or make the whole house narrower in general. But being able to use these energy tools with the architectural process makes it a tool that you can use for decision making as well as sizing equipment. And in the past, that's just been for sizing equipment. So energy modeling is this is one of those points I mentioned that we might dive into a little bit more, because I'm a big fan of energy modeling, if you couldn't tell. So the Manual J is pretty much the basis for energy modeling softwares that are out there. And there seems to be a new one every day I look. There's so many jurisdictions making energy modeling softwares. And it's important to, we used 3, for instance. It's really important to check and balance what you're getting for outputs because they can change very easily. And most of the softwares with one checkbox, you've got 25% in the wrong direction. So it's really important to use more than one software, I would say. I did my first energy model back in 2013. So I've been doing it for a while now. So there's 2 different types of energy modeling that you're really going to see most often. There's load calculations, and then there's energy modeling. And so energy loads, the load calculations, those are just going to do peaks. So at the hottest day of the year and the coldest day of the year in your local area. And then energy modeling is going to do annual use and the usage throughout every day in that year. So we do 8760 energy models, and the 8760 comes from 24 hours in a day and 365 days in a year. So every single hour of your year is modeled based on accurate weather calculations, history, and predictions for your exact geological location. So the 8760 energy models do a lot more than just a load calc. And they're really important to get a better idea of how your building's going to operate before you even build it. And so these energy models, what they would take into account that a load might not is internal gains, like you run your oven every night at 7 o'clock to make dinner, or you take a shower at 6 o'clock in the morning every day, and that shower is going to have sensible gains and latent gains. And the latent gains are humidity that you also need to take into account in your energy models. They're going to take into account infiltration, energy recovery, hoods, like on your oven hood or exhaust fans in your bathroom. They're going to take into account the assemblies and the R values of your building. Also your building orientation and solar gains and shading. So how much your building might heat up in those specific rooms. And then again, the climate-based data, which is published by the IECC based on climate a climate map we're going to show in the next slide. And then there's a third type of calculations for energy, which is called hydrothermal energy simulations. These aren't very common, but you'll probably see the most pictures of them on the internet because they're usually beautiful. They're used for a different goal, basically. They're used to answer questions regarding thermal moisture, thermal and moisture movement within an assembly. So typically a wall assembly or a connection of a roof and a wall or the corner of a slab. They're usually for difficult assemblies that the architect, the engineer want to understand better, perhaps to mitigate any thermal bridging. So when you're doing something different and complex, you might want to do the hydrothermal energy simulations, but they're not typically needed. There we go. So this is the climate map I mentioned before. So this is published by the IECC, and it's followed by pretty much every code jurisdiction. ASHRAE, everyone looks at this to use for a number of different calculations. But so we designed for our plans climate zones 5A through 8, and you can't see 8 on here, but I'll describe. So 5A is going to be this gray area, and A stands for this eastern half of our country, which is considered a moist climate, and B is considered the western half of our country, which is a drier climate. 7 is up pretty far north here, also in parts of Alaska. Majority of Canada would be considered a 7, although they do a different breakdown based on heating degree days rather than the IECC climate zones. And then climate zone 8 would be parts of Alaska as well. So then once you have your building design well done, coordinated with the architect, as efficient as you can get it, you've done your energy loads and you've got it down to a pretty decent, ballpark, that's where you would pick your HVAC equipment. And there's a lot of different systems. There's so many different systems out there. What we chose to do for our net zero designs is an air to water heat pump, just one, that works in a cold climate with which will produce the hot water for the radiant floor systems, which we also sized. And so the heat pumps don't put out as much when it gets colder. And so you need to have electric backup for those super cold days. And so the way we handled that was with two different options. So we did the first, which is electric wall heaters, and they make some really nice electric wall heaters now, which are just direct resistance, and they fit between 2 studs, and they're relatively small. And they kick on with internal thermostat. So if your room is below set point, it'll just kick on. And so with our designs, it varies by the home, but when it's like a negative 20-degree day in northern Vermont and your radiant is kicking out as much as it can, you might have a bathroom on the far side of the home that has, a little more windows than it might have wanted. And that one electric heater might kick on. As an alternative, we also did a pellet stove backup. And so pellet stove, we designed on a high efficiency listed option, which we put in the living space, and we actually did maps to show like, hey, this is where it would pretty much cover as a heating offset or backup. But I think if anybody lives in a very cold spot, they all know that when you go on vacation, it will be a negative 20-degree week, and you won't be there to fill that pellet stove. That's pretty much how it goes. So other HVAC equipment that we designed around was kitchen hoods and bathroom exhaust fans, which directly vent to the outdoors. And that is absolutely essential. Having a kitchen hood that just recirculates with a filter is not good enough. And same with bathroom fans. A lot of past builders would just vent them to the attic, and it's just an immediate mold issue. Don't do it. So anytime we have a tub or a shower, put an exhaust fan in, run that exhaust fan, and directly vent that outside. That is just going to be straight exhaust air. So then we designed a separate system for energy recovery. And this is something that we've seen people are doing it differently. Some people tie the energy recovery into the exhaust of the bathrooms, which is fine, but sometimes it's not always run, and energy recovery needs to be run 24/7 because it's, or not energy recovery, but ventilation. And the way we do ventilation is with an energy recovery unit. So ventilation air is just the fresh air in your home. And by code, it's based on the square feet of your home and the number of people that are living in it. So typically it goes by bedrooms. And we'll go into that in another slide coming up. A couple things that we like people to take into consideration with net zero homes, or even just new tight homes in general. Humidity can be an issue. They're far tighter than they used to be. And the best way to address it is if you're a person who boils a lot of vegetables, makes a lot of tea, takes a lot of showers, if you're drying your laundry, like just air drying with a rack, those are going to be huge humidity point sources in your home. So you might want to consider just getting a dehumidification unit for your house. And they make ones that run automatically that you don't even need to dump out, that drain to a central spot. So just something to consider upfront early on before it's an issue. There's also other options besides radiant floors. You can do like baseboard. They make low water, high temp baseboard fin tube radiation systems. And so the low water is kind of a big one with air to water heat pumps. You're going to be running just a slightly lower water temperature in general. Homes with fossil fuel burning boilers usually are running around 180. So that's just a design consideration that you're going to have slightly lower water temps, which means slightly different terminal units, I guess you would call it. And the last consideration is air conditioning. And so what's really great is because of the high R values of these homes, not only is our heating needs reduced, but so is our air conditioning because of just the inherent thermal values and lack of thermal transfer when you have high R values. And so what we were finding with our plans is that typically one mini split would do it. And that's something that you might see with other net zero homes is that they design only on mini splits. And what's difficult with a mini split is that their cooling capacity and heating capacity are completely different. So you might, and it's, let's say if you're doing a net zero home and you're only doing mini splits, but you're the little thing on the wall with a condensing unit that matches it outside. And sometimes you could have two wall units and one condensing unit, depending on the manufacturer. What happens is you end up with more of those units in your building than you really need just to meet certain requirements, certain heating loads or cooling loads, because they don't match very well. So for us, our biggest plan in the hottest environment we designed to, one mini split is going to meet the cooling. And it's really kind of up, we left it up to the owners and the builders, I guess, as to where to put that unit, because some people might want it in their bedroom, some people might want it in their living room. But a general thing to consider avoiding is going all mini splits on your home, because it's going to be oversized and less efficient. My headset just turned off. We're back on, hopefully. Somebody send a chat if that didn't restart it. So the second bracket is space efficiency. And some of our favorite design concepts on space efficiency are really just based on a smaller square footage. The smaller square footage, the better. That's probably a no-brainer, and I'm sure everyone probably agrees that a well laid out home doesn't have to be as big as a big, poorly laid out home. So we have a number of design concepts to help lay out a better home that's a smaller square footage in general. So some of our favorite concepts are space utilization, open layouts, aging in place, noise, indoor air quality, mudrooms and entries, and I have a box over this last one, so I can't read it. Multi-purpose spaces, that's right. All right. So space utilization is probably the hardest one to describe. It is the space. So with it, let's say you have 1,000 square foot home. 14 to 18% of that is going to be hallways, just walking from point A to point B, hallway space. And then of that 1,000 square foot, another 16 to 18% of it is going to be used for just like the thickness of a wall, which is usually a 4.5-inch wall. And that's just a 2x4 stud with, sheetrock on, or, finished material on either side. So that is a lot of living space of your 1,000 square feet already taken up. So this is why it's essential to really plan accordingly and take the time to think about door swings and where the bottom sill of a window is. Can you put a bookshelf under it or can you not? The path of travel for when you're walking in your house, this is something we think about. When you're walking in your house and you're carrying more bags of groceries than you really should be, what is the direct path where you're like running in, don't want to drop it? How can you get there? And that's something that you should design around, and it takes time. And another one of our favorites is, we call it a runaround loop. So we try to, it doesn't always happen, but we try to consider this in our plans where specifically like a 3 or a 4-bedroom home where you're probably going to have a family living in it. Is there a path where you can run a full circle around the house? If you have a puppy or if you have kids or grandkids, or even, as adults, sometimes you just like to run around a little bit. So, especially us being cooped up this last year, I'm sure we can all appreciate well used spaces. And this is a link I can send to everybody. It's a download on our website. We call it our project. I forgot what we called it. But anyways, there's the sheet in here called our room planner. And this is something that anybody can use if they're trying to figure out, we want to build a house. How many square feet do we really need? And it's a little checkbox system where, like, let's say you want a small master bedroom and a closet, and then you want an entryway with half a bath. And you just kind of go through the sheet and you come out at the bottom and you figure out, okay, this is how many square feet I need. Within the download, there's a little sample. So like this is a 1,000 square foot cottage sample, and it ended up being 1,060 square feet. And then we have a third sheet here which describes exactly, if you're checking the small bedroom, what can you really fit in there? And you can fit in a small bedroom a twin bed and a large dresser, for instance. So if you want a queen bed, you might want to go with the medium bedroom, things like that. So this is a free download that I can send the link for at the end. So that's space utilization, one of our favorites. Another favorite to consider when you're trying to design for small square footage is an open layout. And open layout has been, a thing of the past, the present, and the future. Everybody loves open layouts, but you can do them wrong. And doing them wrong is when you walk into the house and you have no place to put your shoes, and there's like, friends and family are watching you get your jacket off, and you jumped into the middle of this conversation, and you can see all the way through into like, the laundry room when there's this pile of stuff, and that's a bad open layout. You don't want to see all that because it's an invasion of privacy. It's not very welcoming. So the way we like to do open layouts is the kitchen, the dining, and the living room. And those all you kind of cluster because they're where you really hang out. That's where your whole family kind of thrives together. And so in having an open layout, it's important to have a direct line of sight. You don't necessarily have to have big swooping openings, but as long as you can see in between them, that's really important. So clear line of sight between the kitchen, dining, and living rooms. And then we like to surround this open layout of those 3 areas with utility spaces. And those utility spaces we call, entryways or bedrooms or laundry rooms, bathrooms, things you don't necessarily want a direct eye of line sight to, or a clear line of sight through. There we go. So open layout with utility spaces around it is a really nice way to do it. So then the next design concept when you're thinking about square footage is aging in place. And I just want to say this is not ADA. That's a completely different set of requirements that, this is not what we're talking about. We're talking about aging in place and accessibility. And so this could be for, an older homeowner or someone who has an older family member living with them, or even somebody who's got a kid who plays soccer and has crutches every single fall. These are all things that a home should have, especially if we want to be comfortable at all stages of our life. And so things to consider are having at least one bedroom on the first floor. If not the master, then at least a guest room. 36-inch wide doorways is a really essential thing. A first floor walk-in shower stall, often missed, but really important. Also hallways that are slightly wider. So a 48-inch wide hallway is something to really try to do. And then laundry rooms, a first floor laundry room, you hardly ever see. It's usually the laundry stuffed in this dark dungeon in the basement. But a first floor laundry room with a stacked washer dryer unit is another really essential thing for designing with aging in place and accessibility in mind. Um, and then here's one more, noise, another really often missed consideration. But when you're doing a small square footage home, it's something you should consider, especially today where I'm sure we all notice everything makes a noise, everything beeps and sings and whistles, and it's hard to escape sometimes all of the background sounds, which are noise. And designing a home that can be quiet when you need it to be quiet, or you just need a break and you want it to be quiet, is important. So design considerations to limit noise in your home are centralized plumbing, which is also ideal for domestic water distribution, which has another set of requirements that we're not diving into in this presentation. But also shared walls is something to consider. So if you're doing a layout of a home and you have the head of your master bedroom shares a wall with a toilet or a dishwasher, or a washer machine, that's not ideal. You're going to be kept up until that machine is done doing its cycle at the end of the night. Closets are an excellent noise buffer. So if you do have, a bedroom and then a closet and then an appliance, you're going to be way better off. Sharing that wall is going to just lead to vibrations, which are hard to avoid. And then also a couple of things that make noise are living rooms where people might stay up and watch TV, and front doors if you have perhaps youngsters that work the night shift coming home. So those are all things to consider, just appliances that make noise and where you might want those located. The last two design concepts on here about reducing your square footage and things to keep in mind. Entryways and mudrooms, we're full supporters of. We don't do anything without an entryway of some sort, and perhaps that's my living in a four-season climate my whole life. But anywhere that's got a multi-season climate, an entryway should be considered. um, they set the tone for your home's organization, its style, its cleanliness, its welcoming. And that sounds very architectural, but it's also um, kind of a protection for your home as well. So the personal organization of it is a place to keep everything, and it's a sense of comfort. Like where your hat is. Like your hat is in the entryway. You can't leave the house without a hat in the winter. There it is. It's always there. A welcoming space, kind of as my example earlier, where if you have an open layout and you're having friends over, it's nice to have that transition of coming into the home, taking off your coat, taking a breath, and then entering whatever festivities are going on. If you walk in and I see this on so many plans. You walk into the living room and you blast everyone with cold air and they yell, shut the door. And you're taking off your jacket and your boots on display. And then you're like, hey, everyone. It's not necessarily the nicest welcoming. And then the cleanliness aspect of it is protecting your home from outdoor contaminants. So an entryway and a mudroom does a great job of doing that. The pollen that collects on our clothes when we're outside, bugs, hitching, or like ticks hitching a ride on your boots from a walk out in the woods, mud, dirt, salts, melting snow, all of those things are outdoor contaminants that you want to protect the interior of your home from. And so that's why we design for an entryway or a mudroom in every plan. And then indoor air quality is a topic that I think everyone is kind of brought to the forefront. Mike and I were talking about this just before the presentation about how the pandemic has brought indoor air quality to light. And by code, as I mentioned slightly a bit earlier, ventilation is required based on occupancy and square footage. And when you calculate it based on the most stringent codes, it ends up being about 2 to 3 air changes per hour. And an air change per hour is when all of the air in your space is fully replaced by fresh air. And the 2 to 3 air changes per hour is pretty interesting because the majority of my background is commercial, and commercial codes for buildings there, it's different for a hospital and it's different for a commercial building, but air changes per hour vary based on the space. And so a corridor in an office building might have 4 air changes per hour by code, and an operating room might have 8 or 10, depending on what type of operating suite it is. So 2 to 3 air changes per hour is actually kind of neat. It's a little bit less than you might see in commercial environments, but it's still pretty decent. So we do that, as I mentioned earlier, with 24/7 energy recovery ventilation units. And for anyone who doesn't know, an energy recovery ventilation unit is pretty neat. It's usually just a little square with a fan, and it's got 2 pads of air. I should have put this on a slide. But what happens is the outgoing air and the incoming air cross. Um, they touch the same, usually a metal plate, and so the heat from one goes to the other and they kind of, share energy. And so it ends up being you're not fully reheating cold winter air. It already got heated up by just passing by through this unit. So energy recovery units are great. They're really, really great. Indoor air quality, again, exhaust air from kitchens, supply air to bedrooms and living spaces, bathrooms with showers that have separate dedicated exhaust fans to get rid of moisture so you don't have any mildew or bacteria. And then kitchens, so cooking, baking, or burning toast, I think we've all heard it once or twice, but they can be pretty great environmental hazards. And so having a kitchen hood really should become more common. And there are certain codes when you get too many CUFM running through that hood, you do need to require makeup air. So there is a sweet spot for designing the right size hood. But yeah, the little recirculating ones aren't quite enough. And then a last one is multi-purpose spaces. And this is something that we all forget, that you can reuse a space for all sorts of different stuff. And I think this last year we've all been getting into that. A home office becomes a home classroom, or we need personal spaces, which end up being just a bookshelf where we keep things that are important to us. That's our little escape. So redefining spaces throughout the whole life cycle of a home is really great. So a nicely tucked corner with a rug or a bookshelf can really be a kind of an escape or a getaway, which I'm sure we're all probably doing. And then the last topic or bulletin of designing an integrated design process is resource efficiency. And this one's pretty simple, nothing like the other ones. I've gone into a little bit of detail, I'm sorry. So resource efficiency is similar to what we noticed when we were doing energy models, that an old home is remarkably efficient. So a historical shape, Cape or colonial, is square, it's rectangular, it's symmetrical. There is not any of this craziness. And so looking at these decorative features on these homes that I think we all start to see more and more is these little bump outs, like a bump out of 1 foot, or an extra pitch, or a false roof line. Any of those things are material waste, because every time you have, let's say, a 10-foot wall and you chop it up just to make one little bump out, you have to cut down all of that material. And so what you have, like a 1-foot piece, you might not have been able to use the rest of it. So there ends up being an astronomical amount of material waste, which construction already has enough of. So reducing those bump outs, like a dormers are notorious for material waste and time waste. It takes time to cut down all these materials and assemble them correctly. And assembling correctly is, even when done right, all of these extra bumps and jogs are all potential seam, or they are seams, but they're all potential spots for future leaks or bugs to get in, or animals to find their way in. They're also harder to insulate. So you might not get this R34 wall that you really want, because the insulation you can't really tuck up in there because you had to do this crazy little jog to make it look aesthetically pleasing. So this is just a reminder to try to steer clear of the fake bumps and jogs, and simple but beautiful is really the way to go for resource efficiency. And so this is where I'm wrapping up. What net zero used to mean back in the day is hiring an architect, hiring an engineer, having your site in mind, so you already know where you're building and what direction is north. And what I'm sure we're not the first, but what we're trying to do at BTF is stock net zero. So you can buy a plan that's already pre-designed, comes with all the calculations for almost every building site within 35 states. And so net zero is now easier. It's contractor friendly. It can be faster. You don't need to hire an engineering firm for 3 months of calculations before you can even break ground. It's all things that we personally did, so I'm sure there's others doing it, and it's just part of being able to design a net zero home that looks and feels like a normal home. And here's a couple of examples of, they look pretty normal and they would feel normal inside as well. And just a note of small square footages and still plenty of bedrooms and bathrooms. Again, the historical classic sort of look is very essential. But last bit, frequently asked questions. I think we've covered all these, but when I send the link in the questions here next, we have a frequently asked questions page on our website, and I think we've covered a lot of them today, but you're welcome to go find out more. Why build net zero? Can a net zero home look and feel normal? Fossil fuel free net zero? You have to be wary, sometimes they're not. What HVAC systems are you looking at with a net zero home? What sort of R values or assemblies? The climate zones. For us, it's 5A through 8, but maybe somebody on here is from somewhere else. And then a quick recap of codes and standards. So typically when you buy a home plan, like, oh no, how do I go back? Go to slide. Back one slide. Typically, when you buy a stock home plan, it's going to just meet the IRC, the International Residential Code. And it's really important. These net zero homes are actually meeting a lot more, or they should be meeting a lot more. So we put a bullet point here, and I won't make you guys all read those, but they're on our website if you're curious. Somewhere near the bottom is the DOE Zero Energy Ready Home Program, or Home National Requirements, rather. And within that, meeting Energy Star and I think the EPA Air Plus, those are all kind of entwined together. But make sure you ask these questions if you guys are building a net zero home. And that'll wrap it up. And we've got 5 minutes for questions, I think. But thanks for joining in and learning all about integrated net zero design. I really appreciate it, you guys. So go to the chat. I'm going to stop the share. Here we go. And Mike, if you're still on here, you're welcome to do a recap if that's something you're looking to do.
Gwen, let's see. Fantastic. I mean, a lot to absorb. You've covered so much. I think that the range of questions in the chat is indicative of the different opinions and different areas that you've activated. The first one that jumps out at me is what about Vermont building codes? Do you see this net zero becoming a requirement in the state, or is this something we should bring up at the policy discussion tomorrow?
I was actually thinking about that. I look forward to hearing what they say in the policy discussion. So I have it over here on my bookshelf, but Vermont has they call it the RBs, the Residential Energy Building Standard, and those are something that we designed to as well. They could be more stringent, and I think that they should address fossil fuels. And something that I found in those that's very interesting, and I think a lot of people forget, is that there's a separate standard for log homes. Log homes are so inefficient because it's literally just wood between you and your exterior wall. And the house that we bought, it was already built when we bought it, has half log siding, and we chip dry rot off of the occasional log. And I think any log home, you'd never notice if you have dry rot coming in and becoming a structural issue. So um, that's not really answering your question, but it was just something that the RVs reminded me of. Yeah.
The and also I raised the question of fireplaces because I've heard that they are really just a way to poison the air in a home. I mean, we all love to watch fireplace, but any point of view on that
Yeah.
one?
I Yes. So open air fireplaces are becoming, I think, far less common. There's obviously a lot of historical homes that have them, and the the flue and draft calculations in an open air fireplace do take a lot of time to make sure that you're not just completely burning out, and making sure that those, like you said, those flue gases actually go up. The flue is very important. So what we designed for was just pellet stoves, because pellet stoves are remarkably efficient at keeping the particles and the burn process at a high efficiency within its assembly. Nothing's perfect. We have a pellet stove in our basement, and when you dump out the bag, there are some dust bits. But if somebody is going to absolutely need a fireplace, a high efficiency pellet stove that's very small is really very efficient. As a skier, when you need to dry out your clothing so it's ready for the next morning, there's nothing more efficient than sticking it by the fire. Or pellet stove for us. Yeah.
Two other
Um,
questions that are interesting. I love the comment from Derek suggesting that you have an open opportunity in the United Kingdom because they also have a long way to go. We were talking about the 6 million buildings in New York State that need to be upgraded. So maybe across the pond is a
yeah.
new option for you. Um, what do you think? You mentioned yurts and round buildings. Are they in fact the most efficient?
I actually haven't really looked at how a yurt is assembled. I think my husband really likes them a lot more than I do. I really need to read about them more. Um, I don't know what sort of R values they typically offer. I do know that they are floating off of the ground, and so insulating, and this kind of answers the basement question. Um, Having a floor that's also exposed is a lot more surface area that you need to take care of, so it's not efficient. Um, we do have two plans that are slab on grade, and there's pros and cons with basements. I think a real pro is having that extra mechanical space, particularly if you're going to have a PV system, or even high efficiency systems in general, take up a little bit of mechanical space. So if you're doing slab on grade, you need to make sure you have a mechanical room just dedicated to systems.
Great, great. Well, we are
I
now
didn't
at
get to the
1 o'clock.
others. Sorry.
We are at 1 o'clock, so I would love to encourage dialogue. Um, Gwen's contact information is and will remain on SolarFest website, and this presentation will be uploaded and available for reuse within a week or so. So, but we look forward to the next SolarFest when it's another beautiful day where we can all uh, get in the same room. And thank you very much for your presentation. It was wonderful.